Hey everyone. Tonight we travel back to a time when empires could be brought to the brink of war not by spies or assassins, but by a pig. Imagine a perfect, misty June morning on a remote island. The air smells of salt and pine. The only sound is the gentle lapping of waves against the shore, and you're tending to your precious potato patch. Suddenly, a very large, very determined pig starts treating your future food supply like an all-you-can-eat buffet. It's a scenario where, let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this without losing your cool. And in 1859, losing your cool had international consequences. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love to see where you're all listening from, so drop your city or country and the local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet are damp with dew as you step out onto the porch of a modest log cabin. It's June 15th, 1859, and you are on San Juan Island, a verdant jewel nestled in the Salish Sea, squeezed between the mainland of Washington Territory and the massive Vancouver Island. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of cedar and the faint, briny tang of the low tide. It's breathtakingly beautiful, a pioneer's dream of rolling hills, dense forests, and tranquil coves. But there's a tension in the air, a quiet humming of uncertainty that has nothing to do with the bees in the nearby clover. This paradise has a problem. Two of the most powerful nations on Earth, the United States and Great Britain, both think they own it. For now, it exists in a state of geopolitical limbo. A few dozen American settlers, like the man whose cabin you're standing near, live on one part of the island. On another, there are employees of the British Hudson's Bay Company, running a large sheep ranch called Belle Vue. There are no fences, no formal borders, just a shared and sometimes strained understanding. You're watching a man named Lyman Cutler. He's a Kentucky native, one of those lean, hardy types who came west seeking not gold but land. He's staked his claim, built his cabin, and most importantly, planted a garden. For a man living on the edge of civilization, this garden isn't a hobby. It's his life insurance. The potatoes pushing up through the dark, rich soil are his food for the winter, the tangible result of months of back-breaking labor. You can almost feel his quiet pride as he surveys his work in the early morning light. But then, you see his jaw tighten. His gaze fixes on a spot at the edge of his property. There, waddling with an air of unearned confidence, is a pig. Not just any pig. This is a large black, a breed known for being particularly good at finding its own food, a skill it's currently demonstrating with gusto. It's big, it's black, and it has a snout purpose-built for one thing: destruction. Specifically, the destruction of Lyman Cutler's potato patch. You watch as the pig, with the single-minded focus of a true gourmand, begins to root and snuffle, tearing up the carefully tilled rows. One potato, then another, disappears into its maw. This isn't the first time. Cutler has complained before. He's yelled at the pig. He's shooed it away. He's even approached its owner, an Irishman named Charles Griffin who works for the Hudson's Bay Company, and told him to keep his hog contained. Griffin's response, you can imagine, was probably less than sympathetic. Something along the lines of, "It's a pig, what do you expect?" But for Cutler, this is the final straw. It's not just about the potatoes anymore, it's about respect. It's about a British pig, owned by a British company man destroying an American farmer's property on what he firmly believes is American soil. Every uprooted plant feels like a tiny act of foreign aggression. You see the internal debate flicker across his face, a flash of anger, a wave of weary frustration. He turns without a word and walks back into his cabin. The morning quiet hangs heavy for a moment, broken only by the contented grunts of the porcine perpetrator. A modern person might pull out their phone to document the damage for a small claims court filing. Cutler, however, emerges with a different tool for conflict resolution: his rifle. He doesn't hesitate. He raises the gun, the wooden stock settling firmly against his shoulder. He takes aim. Historians still argue whether Lyman Cutler was making a calculated political statement or was simply a farmer pushed past his breaking point. Was this a symbolic defense of American sovereignty, a tiny shot heard round the diplomatic world? Or was he just a guy who really wanted to eat his own potatoes for dinner? Maybe it was both. You see the puff of smoke before you hear the crack of the shot. The sound rips through the morning calm, sending a flock of birds scattering from the nearby trees. It echoes across the water, a sharp, definitive statement. Down in the garden, the pig lets out a final squeal and collapses into the very dirt. It was so gleefully desecrating moments before. The only casualty of the entire pig war has just fallen. Silence descends again, but it's a different kind of silence now. It's heavy, ringing, filled with the weight of what's just happened. Cutler slowly lowers his rifle, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the cool air. He walks down to his garden, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. He stands over the dead animal, and you can almost see the gravity of the situation begin to settle on him. This isn't just a dead pig. It's a dead British pig, slain by an American, on disputed land. It is a dead pig that is about to become an international incident of the most absurd proportions, threatening to drag two global superpowers into a conflict they absolutely did not want. The quiet of the island is about to be shattered for good. Somewhere in the distance, a voice starts yelling. The pig's owner is coming. The yelling gets closer. It's an angry Irish-accented bellow that cuts through the post-gunshot stillness. You stand there, a silent observer next to Lyman Cutler, watching him watch the approaching figure of Charles Griffin, the pig's now bereaved owner. The dead animal between them is more than just a source of future bacon. It's the physical manifestation of a much bigger problem. To understand how this single pig could possess enough geopolitical weight to threaten a war, you have to rewind the clock about 13 years and trade this misty island for a stuffy room filled with maps, inkwells, and anxious diplomats. You have to go back to the source of all the confusion, a treaty with a very blurry line. Picture it. It's 1846. The United States and Great Britain are like two siblings arguing over the last slice of pizza, except the pizza is a massive, largely unmapped wilderness called the Oregon Country. It stretches from the Rockies to the Pacific, a colossal chunk of North America. Both countries have citizens there, both have economic interests, and both have a habit of getting into scraps with each other. American expansionists, fueled by the concept of manifest destiny, are chanting the slogan, 54-40 or fight, demanding a border far to the north. The British, with their powerful Hudson's Bay Company trapping and trading all over the region, aren't about to just pack up and leave. For a moment, it looks like a third war between the two nations is not just possible, but likely. But thankfully, cooler heads prevail. No one really wants a war over what many back east still considered a remote wasteland. The British Foreign Secretary, a rather pragmatic man named Lord Aberdeen, was famously so keen to get a deal done that he basically said he didn't care if the territory was populated by bears and monkeys, as long as it didn't lead to conflict. So they compromise. They pull out a map, draw a line, and sign the Oregon Treaty of 1846. On the mainland, it's beautifully simple. They agree to extend the border along the 49th parallel, that clean, straight line that already separates much of the US and Canada. Easy. Problem solved. Except when that nice straight line hits the Pacific Ocean, it runs into a geographic complication. A massive landmass called Vancouver Island, which was indisputably British. The treaty couldn't just slice through it. So the diplomats add a clause. The border upon reaching the coast shall proceed to the middle of the channel which separates the continent from Vancouver's island, and thence southerly through the middle of the said channel, and of Fuca's Straits to the Pacific Ocean. Simple enough, right? Just follow the channel. Here's the problem, nobody specified which channel. If you look at a map of the area, it's not one big clear channel. It's a messy cluster of islands, the San Juan archipelago, with two main navigable passages. There's the Haro Strait, which runs closer to Vancouver Island on the west, and the Rosario Strait, which runs closer to the American mainland on the east. It's like trying to give someone directions by saying, turn left at the big tree, when there are two big trees. The Americans naturally looked at the map and said, clearly the channel means the Haro Strait, which would put the valuable San Juan Islands on their side of the border. The British, with equal conviction, looked at the same map and said, Obviously, the channel refers to the Rosario Strait, which would keep the islands and their strategic importance safely within the British Empire. Historians still argue whether this was just a colossal blunder born of shoddy maps and diplomatic haste, or a clever, if risky, bit of intentional ambiguity. Did the negotiators, in their relief to have avoided a war, just sign off on the vague wording and decide to kick the can down the road for future generations to deal with? Or did one side, or both, see the ambiguity and think, well, we'll just quietly move in and establish facts on the ground and sort out the paperwork later? It was the 19th century equivalent of buying furniture from IKEA and ending up with a few extra screws, knowing full well something isn't quite right, but hoping the whole thing doesn't collapse. For 13 years, this diplomatic oversight didn't really matter. The islands were sparsely populated, and the Hudson's Bay Company operated its sheep ranch, while a handful of American settlers, or squatters, as the British called them, began to arrive and clear land. They coexisted in a state of mild, grumbling tension. They were neighbors in a neighborhood with no defined property lines, each side occasionally muttering to themselves that the other was trespassing. It was a Cold War in miniature, fought with passive-aggressive glares across sheep pastures instead of nuclear arsenals. And now you're back on the island in Cutler's Garden. That vague phrase, "through the middle of the said channel," has just materialized in the form of a 200-pound pig lying dead amongst the potatoes. The abstract argument over cartography and maritime law has become incredibly, viscerally real. The two interpretations of the treaty are about to have a face-to-face meeting. You see Charles Griffin finally arrive. He's a big man, his face flushed red with a combination of exertion and pure rage. He stops short, his eyes fixing first on his prized pig, then locking onto Lyman Cutler. The air crackles. The first words of the pig war are about to be spoken, and you can be sure they won't be diplomatic. Charles Griffin's face is a thundercloud. You can see the fury in his eyes as he takes in the scene. His pig, a valuable piece of company property, lying lifeless in the dirt of an American squatter's garden. Lyman Cutler stands his ground, rifle held loosely at his side, his expression a mixture of defiance and perhaps the first flicker of apprehension. Before they even exchange words, you can feel that this is more than just a dispute between two neighbors. These two men are the embodiment of the island's split personality, two flags planted on the same small patch of earth. To truly grasp the tension of this moment, you need to understand the two separate overlapping worlds that are about to collide right here in this potato patch. Let's look at Griffin's world first. He's an employee of the Hudson's Bay Company, the formidable fur trading enterprise that for centuries acted as the de facto government across vast swathes of British North America. In 1853, the HBC, in a move that was as much about politics as it was about agriculture, established a massive sheep ranch on San Juan Island. They called it Belle Vue Farm. This wasn't some rustic little hobby farm. It was a projection of British power, an imperial foothold. Imagine a sprawling, orderly operation with a large main house, neat rows of employee cottages, substantial barns, and fences. Lots of fences, though apparently not enough to contain a particularly adventurous pig. The real symbol of Belle Vue's purpose, however, was the sheep. Thousands of them. And these weren't just any old sheep. The company had developed its own special breed, a cross between hardy Cheviots and fine-wooled Merinos. They were, in essence, bespoke sheep designed for this specific colonial enterprise. It's a wonderfully British detail. If you're going to assert a territorial claim, you might as well do it with genetically superior livestock. Griffin, as the man in charge of the company's pigs, was a cog in this well-oiled machine. He reported to superiors, followed company rules, and lived with the certainty that he was on solid British ground, protected by the full might and majesty of the crown. To him, Cutler wasn't a neighbor. He was an illegal trespasser. Now, pan over to Lyman Cutler's world. It couldn't be more different. He represents the 30 or so American families who had trickled onto the island over the past few years. They weren't an organized company. They were a loose collection of individuals. Their settlement had no formal name, just a scattering of rough-hewn log cabins and cleared plots of land connected by muddy tracks. Where the British saw order and enterprise, the Americans embodied a scrappy frontier individualism. They were fiercely independent, beholden to no one but themselves, and driven by the quintessentially American belief that this land was theirs for the taking. Historians still argue whether these American settlers were simply acting on their own pioneering spirit, or if they were subtly encouraged by the authorities in the newly formed Washington Territory. Were they genuine homesteaders, or were they, consciously or not, human placeholders, a way for the U.S. government to create facts on the ground and bolster its claim to the islands? It's likely a bit of both. For men like Cutler, the promise of fertile land free from government interference was a powerful lure. The fact that their presence also happened to annoy the British was probably just a patriotic bonus. Before this fateful morning, life on the island was a masterclass in awkward coexistence. It was like two families who both think they have the deed to the same house, so they just move in and try to ignore each other. An American might buy a joint of lamb from the British company store. A British shepherd might share a nod with an American farmer on a trail. But underneath this fragile civility, the core conflict was always simmering. The Americans viewed the HBC as a foreign monopoly trying to muscle them out. The British, in turn, saw the Americans as lawless squatters, slowly encroaching on Crown land. The biggest issue was the complete lack of a unified legal system. If an American had a complaint, he'd have to take a boat to Whatcom County on the mainland to see an American official. If a British subject had an issue, he'd report it to his superiors, who would refer it to the British governor on Vancouver Island. There was no local sheriff, no courthouse, no authority that both sides recognized. This legal vacuum meant that any spark could ignite a fire, because there was no one on the island with the power to put it out. And now, that spark has been struck. As you watch Griffin and Cutler face off, you see the inevitable result of this impossible situation. Griffin, a representative of British law and order, sees a clear case of property destruction by a criminal. Cutler, an avatar of American frontier justice, sees a justified act of defending his livelihood from a foreign nuisance. He had shot a pest. In his mind, it was no different than shooting a deer for dinner or a wolf attacking his chickens. The first words are finally exchanged, and they are exactly as you'd expect. Griffin, sputtering with rage, demands to know what Cutler is playing at. The quiet, tense standoff on San Juan Island is about to get very, very loud. "It was eating my potatoes." Lyman Cutler's voice is firm without a trace of apology. You watch him stand his ground as Charles Griffin, his face now purple with rage, gestures wildly at the deceased animal. "My potatoes," Cutler repeats, as if that simple fact explains and justifies everything. To understand the unshakable certainty in his voice, the steel in his spine as he confronts the furious employee of the British Empire, you have to pull back from this shouting match and zoom in on the 20 minutes that came before it. You have to step inside Cutler's mind at the very moment he decided that a garden pest needed to be dealt with permanently. Let's go back. You are with him as he turns from his porch, leaving the sight of the pig's gleeful destruction behind him. You follow him into the dim, cool interior of his log cabin. The air inside smells of wood smoke, leather, and coffee. It's a simple, one-room affair, built with his own hands. A rough-hewn table, a couple of chairs, a bed in the corner, and a stone fireplace. This small space is the center of his universe, the result of years of hard labor. As one of the very first American settlers to put down roots here back in 1850, he's seen this island evolve. He's watched the Hudson's Bay Company expand its operations, and he's felt the simmering resentment grow with each new American family that arrived. Every log in these walls is a testament to his claim, his right to be here. You watch him as he stands in the middle of the room, listening to the muffled grunts of the pig from outside. This isn't an isolated incident. This is a recurring violation. You can almost feel his internal monologue, a slow burn of indignation. He's a reasonable man. He tried talking to Griffin. He likely tried reasoning, then warning. Each time he was presumably met with a shrug or a dismissal. To Griffin and the HBC, Cutler and his little farm are a temporary nuisance. To Cutler, this farm is his entire future. The pig isn't just eating potatoes, it's eating his security, his labor, his independence. It's a walking, snorting symbol of the casual arrogance of the British, who let their livestock roam free as if the entire island is their personal pasture. Historians still argue whether Lyman Cutler's action was premeditated. Did he wake up that morning, look at the sky and think, you know what? If that pig shows up today, that's the end of it? Or was it a true snap decision, a sudden boiling over of long-simmering frustration? You watch his movements for clues. There's no hesitation. His jaw is set. He moves purposefully to the wall where his rifle hangs on a pair of pegs. This isn't a weapon of war. It's a tool, as essential to his survival as his axe or his plow. It's for hunting deer, discouraging wolves, and on this particular morning, for pest control. He takes the rifle down. The wood of the stock is smooth and familiar in his hands. The metal is cool to the touch. He checks the load, his movements economical and practiced. As he does this, he knows exactly whose pig it is. Free-roaming pigs in the 19th century were almost always marked by their owners with distinctive notches cut into their ears. He's seen that pig before. He knows it belongs to Griffin. This isn't an anonymous act of vandalism. It's a direct message. It's the frontier equivalent of sending a sharply worded legal letter, only with more immediate and irreversible results. He steps back out onto the porch. The morning light seems brighter now, harsher. The pig is still at it, its head buried in the soil, its tail giving a little twitch of happiness. You see Cutler raise the rifle, settling the butt firmly into his shoulder. He squints, lining up the sights. In that moment, the animal ceases to be just a pig. It is the Hudson's Bay Company. It is the British Crown's casual dismissal of his property rights. It is every condescending glance and every muttered comment about American squatters. The potato patch is America, and the pig is a foreign invader. He breathes out slowly, squeezes the trigger. The explosion is a shocking violation of the morning peace. You feel the kick through his shoulder, see the puff of white smoke momentarily obscure his target. The acrid smell of gunpowder fills the air. For a split second, there's a ringing in his ears, then silence. The birds have stopped singing. The pig is down. You sense no panic in him, no rush of adrenaline-fueled regret. There is only a grim, quiet finality. He has drawn a line in the dirt, and he has defended it. So now, as you stand with him again, facing the apoplectic Charles Griffin, you understand his calm. He isn't reacting anymore. He has already acted. He made a choice in the quiet of his cabin, and he saw it through. Griffin can yell all he wants. He can make threats. But Lyman Cutler has already made his statement. He's a man who has reached his limit and has responded in the only way that seemed to make sense in this place, with no laws and no respect for his claim. The ball is now in the other court. The standoff in the potato patch is now a full-blown argument. Charles Griffin, the Irishman, is a storm of indignation. His voice carries across the field, a litany of accusations and threats. Lyman Cutler, the American, is a stone wall of defiance. He just stands there, occasionally repeating his simple, unshakable defense. But he was eating my potatoes. You can see this isn't getting anywhere. This isn't a conversation. It's two different realities colliding with no common ground to stand on. Griffin sees the destruction of his valuable property and an affront to the Hudson's Bay Company. Cutler sees the justified dispatching of a pest and a defense of his home. Griffin, you realize, is used to a certain hierarchy. As an employee of the powerful HBC, he represents the established order on the island. He's part of a system. He has a boss. He likely sees Cutler as a lawless vagrant, and he starts talking like it. "I'll have you arrested," he yells, jabbing a finger in Cutler's direction. "The Crown will hear about this." It's a threat that would carry immense weight anywhere else in the British Empire. But here, in this legal gray zone, it lands with a thud. Cutler just looks at him unimpressed. Arrested by who? You can almost hear him thinking. He tells Griffin as much, retorting that this is America, and the only authorities he recognizes are the ones from Washington Territory. He says he's more than happy to have this dispute adjudicated by his own people. Seeing the stalemate, Cutler, ever the pragmatist, decides to de-escalate. He's made his point. The pig is dead. Now maybe he can make the problem go away. "Look," he says, his tone softening slightly. "I'm sorry about your pig, but it was trespassing. Still, I'm prepared to be fair." He reaches into his pocket as if checking for funds. "I'll offer you $10 for it. Now you have to understand, in 1859, $10 is not nothing. It's a respectable amount, likely more than the pig was actually worth at market. A skilled worker might have to put in 10 days of hard labor to earn that much. It's a fair offer. It's a classic, let's put this behind us gesture. Cutler is essentially offering to buy the pig he just shot, settling the matter financially without admitting any legal wrongdoing. For a moment, you think this might be the end of it. The whole absurd incident could be concluded right here for the price of a few bags of flour. But you see a new look flash across Charles Griffin's face. It's not just anger anymore, it's outrage mixed with a flicker of something else. Maybe opportunity. $10? The offer is, to him, a profound insult. He scoffs, his voice dripping with contempt. $10? He sputters. $10 for that boar? And then comes the justification, the claim that elevates this from a simple farm squabble into the realm of high farce. He declares that this was no ordinary run-of-the-mill potato-thieving hog. Oh no. According to Griffin, the animal lying in the dirt was his prize-breeding boar. He might as well have claimed it was a royal sow, personally knighted by Queen Victoria. Whether this pig had any actual pedigree is completely lost to history. It's far more likely it was just a regular pig, but in this moment of anger and negotiation, it becomes the finest specimen of porcine genetics in the entire Pacific Northwest. Having established the pig's imaginary blue ribbon status, Griffin names his price. He draws himself up to his full height and declares, "You'll pay me $100. The number just hangs in the air, stunning in its absurdity. $100. In 1859, you could buy a decent plot of land for that. You could purchase 2 high-quality milk cows. It was a staggering sum, the modern equivalent of demanding a down payment on a new car because someone's pet chicken scratched up your flower bed. Historians still argue whether Griffin's demand was a genuine, if wildly inflated, valuation of his property, or if it was a calculated provocation. Was he truly that incensed? Or was he intentionally naming a figure so outrageous that Cutler would have to refuse, thus creating an official incident that would force the HBC and the British authorities to finally step in and deal with the American problem? Was he trying to get paid? Or was he trying to start something much, much bigger? Whatever his motive, the effect is instantaneous. Any chance of a simple resolution evaporates. You see the look on Lyman Cutler's face shift from weary pragmatism back to hard defiance. The offer of $10 is rescinded. Cutler shakes his head. Not only will he not pay the $100, he now declares he'll pay nothing. He tells Griffin the pig was a nuisance and was constantly breaking into his property, and that he wouldn't have even let the animal on his farm if Griffin had paid him. The negotiation is over. The two men stand there for another moment, locked in a stalemate of mutual stubbornness. Griffin, having been rebuffed, is left with only his sputtering rage. He's made his threat, he's made his demand, and he's been completely shut down. There's nothing more he can do here. You watch as he turns on his heel, his face still a mask of fury. He storms away, not back toward his own small cottage, but in the direction of the main Belle Vue farm buildings. He's going to see his boss. He's going to file a report. The argument between two men is over, and the official complaint is about to begin. The pig is now climbing the chain of command. You watch Charles Griffin's retreating back, a man on a mission, marching purposefully towards the main buildings of Belle Vue Farm. The personal argument is over, and the bureaucratic escalation is about to begin. He is taking the story of his slain pig, his slain prize pig, to his superiors. This is the moment a spark jumps from the tinder of a personal squabble to the dry timber of national pride. To understand why this happens so quickly, you have to look past the surface of the argument and examine the powerful, unspoken claims simmering just beneath the words. It all boils down to two simple, competing phrases. Griffin's, "That was my property," versus Cutler's, "It was eating my potatoes." You follow Griffin as he arrives at the office of the Hudson's Bay Company, chief agent on the island. Imagine a small, tidy room, smelling of ledger paper and pipe tobacco. A man sits behind a sturdy wooden desk, perhaps looking over shipping manifests or wool production reports. This is the world of British order and commerce. Griffin bursts in, red-faced and breathless, and recounts the morning's events. But listen to the story he's telling. He's not just reporting a dead pig. He's reporting an act of defiance. An American squatter has willfully destroyed valuable company property and, when confronted, has flatly rejected the authority of the HBC, and by extension, the Crown. He has, in essence, declared himself a sovereign nation of one, on land the company considers its own. The man behind the desk understands the implications immediately. His boss is James Douglas, the governor of the colony of Vancouver Island, and also the head of the Hudson's Bay Company in the region. Governor Douglas has made it abundantly clear that the San Juan Islands are strategically and economically vital to British interests. They're perfect for sheep grazing, and they command the shipping channels. The HBC's presence here isn't just about farming, it's a geopolitical statement. So when this report lands on the manager's desk, it's not a minor complaint about livestock. It's a direct challenge to the entire British enterprise in the region. It's a test of their sovereignty. Now shift your perspective back across the island. You're standing with Lyman Cutler again. The fury of the confrontation has faded, and he's left alone in his garden with a dead pig and a lot of uprooted potato plants. Let's dig a little deeper, literally, into his defense. When he says it was eating my potatoes, he is saying so much more. You have to picture the labor involved. A pioneer garden wasn't just a quaint patch of vegetables, it was a lifeline. First, you'd have the back-breaking work of clearing the land, felling trees, pulling stumps, removing rocks. Then the tilling of the soil by hand or with a simple plow, then the planting. And it wasn't just one kind of potato. To survive the long, damp winter, a garden like his would be a miniature Fort Knox of nutrition. Multiple potato varieties for different uses along with carrots, onions, turnips, and hardy cabbages. This patch of dirt was his grocery store, his bank account, and his health insurance policy all rolled into one. Every single sprout was the result of sweat and planning. So when Cutler saw that pig, he didn't see a misplaced farm animal. He saw a wrecking ball demolishing months of his life's work, threatening his very survival through the coming year. His statement, "He was eating my potatoes," is the homesteader's ultimate declaration of rights. It means, this land is mine not because a king drew a line on a map I've never seen, but because I have mixed my labor with this soil. My sweat is in this dirt. My future is in these rows. My claim is written here in calluses and crops, and I will defend it. Cutler's claim is tangible, physical, and bottom-up. I work this land, I live on this land, therefore this land is mine. The dead pig is now the proxy in this much larger battle of ideologies. Back in the HBC office, a decision has to be made. Historians still argue whether the company officials' reaction was simple, by-the-book corporate procedure for dealing with a hostile act, or if they immediately recognized this as the perfect pretext they had been waiting for. Did they see the dead pig as a problem, or as a golden opportunity? An opportunity to force a confrontation, bring in the military, and settle the San Juan question in Britain's favor once and for all. It's hard to say for sure, but their actions speak volumes. They don't send Griffin back with a couple of farmhands to try and reason with Cutler. They don't draft a civil complaint. They treat it as a matter of state. The story of the pig, the potatoes, and the irreconcilable claims is about to be put on a boat. It is on its way to the governor. The conflict is about to get official. You are now on a small boat, cutting through the choppy, cold waters of the Haro Strait. You are accompanying the official report from the Hudson Bay Company as it makes its way from the rustic quiet of San Juan Island to the burgeoning colonial capital of Victoria on the southern tip of Vancouver Island. The journey itself is a study in contrasts. Behind you is the disputed island, a place of muddy tracks, log cabins, and simmering tension. Ahead of you is a symbol of imperial confidence, a proper British town with stone buildings, the beginnings of a formal street grid, and a bustling harbor flying the Union Jack. The pig's story is about to be read under the gaze of Queen Victoria's portrait. The report finds its way to the desk of the most powerful man in the region, James Douglas, governor of the colony of Vancouver Island. Douglas is a formidable figure, a man of action who rose through the ranks of the Hudson's Bay Company to become its chief factor before being appointed governor. They call him Old Square Toes. He's tough, uncompromising, and sees the interests of the HBC and the British Crown as one and the same. To him, this report isn't about a dead pig. It's about a direct, insolent challenge to his authority. An American squatter has destroyed company property and then had the gall to claim American law applies on British soil. This, to Governor Douglas, is an outrage that cannot stand. His response is swift and predictable. He dispatches a British magistrate and several constables back to San Juan Island with a simple, unambiguous order: arrest the American, Lyman Cutler, and bring him to Victoria to stand trial for his crime. Meanwhile, on the American side, news is traveling in the opposite direction, across the Rosario Strait to the mainland town of Whatcom. But the story the Americans are telling is very different. You're there as a group of agitated settlers, Cutler among them, explain their version of events to the local American official, a man named Henry Hubbs, who serves as the justice of the peace. They aren't reporting the commission of a crime. They are reporting a threat of foreign tyranny. The British, they claim, are threatening to invade their homes, drag an American citizen off to a foreign jail, and impose British law on U.S. soil. Cutler isn't a perpetrator. He's a victim of British bullying. The American settlers, now thoroughly alarmed at the prospect of British constables landing on their shores, decide they need to formalize their complaint. They draft a petition, and in a classic move of "let's make our argument as strong as possible," they don't just complain about the British. They bundle in other frontier anxieties. The petition, signed by the American inhabitants, demands military protection from the British and from raids by Northern Indians. It was a common fear at the time, and mentioning it added a layer of urgency and mortal peril to their plea. The pig is now not just a symbol of a property dispute, but the catalyst for a request for protection against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This petition works its way up the American chain of command. It goes from the local justice of the peace to the territorial government, and from there, it finds its way to the desk of the man in charge of the U.S. Army's entire Department of Oregon, Brigadier General William S. Harney. And if you were to hand-pick a man almost guaranteed to escalate this situation, it would be General Harney. He's a veteran of numerous conflicts, known for his aggressive tactics and a notoriously short temper. He is also a fervent nationalist and a committed Anglophobe, still nursing a deep-seated distrust of the British from the War of 1812. Historians still argue whether General Harney was a hot-headed expansionist, looking for any excuse to seize the San Juan Islands for the United States, or a diligent commander who was genuinely and reasonably concerned for the safety of American citizens under his protection. Perhaps the truth is that he was both. You can picture him now, a stern man with a formidable mustache reading the settlers' petition in his headquarters at Fort Vancouver. You can almost see the righteous indignation building in his eyes. American women and children on American soil, threatened by British agents and marauding natives. An American farmer facing arrest by a foreign power for defending his own property. This is not a situation that calls for a diplomatic note. This is a situation that calls for troops. To Harney, the ambiguity of the Oregon Treaty is irrelevant. There are Americans on that island, and that's all that matters. His duty, as he sees it, is to protect them. And protect them he will. He doesn't dither. He doesn't send a subordinate to investigate. He makes a decision that will pour gasoline on this tiny fire. He turns to an aide and dictates an order. He is dispatching a company of the 9th U.S. Infantry to San Juan Island. Their mission: to prevent the British authorities from arresting any Americans and to protect the inhabitants of the island from the insults and indignities being offered by the British. The first military bureaucrats have finished their paperwork. Now the soldiers are on their way. The absurd little drama is about to get a cast of 66 heavily armed men. General Harney's orders travel fast. You're now at Fort Bellingham, a dusty American outpost on the mainland. The men of Company D, 9th U.S. Infantry, are likely going about their monotonous daily routines of drill and maintenance, fighting a constant war against boredom. Suddenly, they have a mission, a real one. They are to pack their gear, board a ship, and sail for San Juan Island to protect American settlers. The reason for this sudden deployment is, to put it mildly, bizarre. They're being sent to a remote island because of a dispute over a dead pig. You can almost hear the grumbling jokes ripple through the ranks as they pack their ammunition. At the head of this company is a man who seems tailor-made for this kind of peculiar, high-stakes drama. His name is Captain George Pickett. Today, his name is forever linked with a catastrophic charge at a place called Gettysburg, but in 1859, he is a charismatic, ambitious, and somewhat flamboyant officer with long, perfumed ringlets of hair and a flair for the dramatic. He is a man who understands the power of a grand gesture, and he has just been handed the perfect stage. He receives his orders from General Harney with, you can imagine, a great deal of enthusiasm. Finally, some action. You board the USS Massachusetts, a military steamship alongside Pickett and his 66 men. As the ship pulls away from the mainland and heads into the maze of islands, the mood is one of anticipation. The soldiers, clad in their dark blue uniforms, check their Springfield rifles. They are professionals, ready to follow orders, even if the orders are to start a military standoff over a piece of livestock. For Pickett, this is an opportunity, a chance to make a name for himself, to be decisive, to show the British that America isn't to be trifled with. On July 27, 1859, the Massachusetts steams into Griffin Bay, on the southern coast of San Juan Island. Its arrival is an electrifying event. The handful of American settlers who have been living in a state of anxious uncertainty for weeks gather on the shore. Imagine their relief and excitement. After all their fears of being arrested and dragged away by British constables, the cavalry, or in this case the infantry, has arrived. You watch as the ship drops anchor, small boats are lowered, and the methodical process of disembarking an army, however small, begins. The soldiers, with their rifles and heavy packs, row to the beach and form up in neat lines. This isn't a posse. This is the United States Army. Captain George Pickett is, of course, in the first boat. He steps onto the shore of San Juan Island like an actor taking center stage. He surveys the small crowd of grateful farmers and their families, and in his booming voice, he makes a declaration that perfectly captures his swaggering confidence. "We've come to protect you," he announces, "and we'll make a damn good fist of it." It's a bold, almost ridiculously aggressive statement for a man with only 66 soldiers at his back, especially when the most powerful navy in the world is just a few hours' sail away. The employees of the Hudson's Bay Company, watching from their perch at Belle Vue farm, are horrified. This is an invasion. A foreign military has just landed unannounced and is setting up camp a stone's throw from their sheep pastures. A frantic message is immediately dispatched to Governor Douglas in Victoria. The situation has escalated beyond all imagination. One dead pig has now resulted in a full-blown military occupation. And it is, without a doubt, an occupation. Historians still argue whether Pickett's actions were a strictly defensive measure, as his orders to protect the settlers would imply, or if he was intentionally executing a provocative act of sovereign conquest. But his actions speak for themselves. He doesn't set up a temporary camp down by the beach. Instead, he marches his men to a commanding piece of high ground that overlooks the bay and, not coincidentally, the main buildings of the Hudson's Bay Company farm. It's a tactical choice, a position of dominance. He then immediately gives the order that transforms this from a visit into a permanent settlement. His men are to begin constructing a fort. They start digging, throwing up earthworks to create a defensive redoubt. Then comes the ultimate symbol of American intent. A tall flagpole is erected, and with as much ceremony as can be mustered, the Stars and Stripes is hoisted into the island breeze. To complete the picture, a cannon is offloaded from the Massachusetts and hauled up the hill to be placed within the new fortifications. The message could not be clearer. This isn't a protective detail. This is a fortress. The United States has seized the island. Pickett has not just made a fist of it, He has planted that fist firmly on what the British consider their sovereign land, and he is daring them to try and move it. The next move belongs to the British, and it is almost certainly going to involve warships. The American flag flying over Captain Pickett's freshly dug fort is more than just a piece of cloth on a pole. It's a thrown gauntlet. It's a beautifully embroidered 33-star invitation to a fight. And you can be sure the British are going to RSVP. The frantic message from the Hudson's Bay Company about the American landing arrives in Victoria, and it lands on Governor James Douglas's desk like a lit firecracker. His initial anger over a disobedient farmer now blossoms into full-blown imperial outrage. This is no longer a civil matter. This is an act of war. An American army, however small, has invaded and occupied British territory. You can picture the scene in the governor's mansion. Maps are spread across tables. Urgent meetings are convened with the senior Royal Navy officer at the nearby naval base of Esquimalt, Captain Geoffrey Hornby. The discussion is no longer about magistrates and arrest warrants, it's about frigates and marines. Governor Douglas, a man not known for his patience or gentle nature, is absolutely incensed. The sheer audacity of the Americans is staggering. He sees Pickett's landing not as a protective measure, but as a hostile seizure of land. Historians still argue whether Governor Douglas in this moment of fury was planning a show of force to scare the Americans away, or if he was fully prepared to order an amphibious assault to forcibly eject Pickett's men from the island, an act that would have undoubtedly started a full-scale war. Whatever his ultimate intention, his immediate order is clear. Respond with overwhelming power. Send the warships. You are now on the docks at Esquimalt Harbor. The signal has been given. A sudden, disciplined flurry of activity erupts. Whistles blow. Sailors and Royal Marines, the elite amphibious soldiers of the British Empire, are mustered on the decks of their vessels. They are professionals, the inheritors of a naval tradition stretching back to Nelson and beyond. They are the instruments of British foreign policy, and they are about to be aimed directly at George Pickett's tiny fort. 3 ships are ordered to make sail for San Juan Island. Leading the flotilla is the flagship, HMS Tribune. This is a truly formidable vessel, a state-of-the-art steam frigate. Picture a sleek, powerful warship over 200 feet long, with a full set of sails but also a steam engine for maneuverability. And most importantly, it bristles with 31 heavy cannons. Accompanying it are the HMS Satellite, another warship, and, in a wonderful touch of historical absurdity, the HMS Plumper. The Plumper is not primarily a warship. It's a survey vessel. Its job is to map coastlines and take depth soundings. It's the 19th century equivalent of bringing your high school geography teacher to a gang fight. However, the Plumper's commander is an expert on these tricky local waters, and even a survey ship carries a few guns. It's a sign of the ad hoc nature of the response, grabbing whatever is available and pointing it at the problem. You're on the deck of the Tribune as it steams out of the harbor. The power of the ship is palpable. The scent of coal smoke mixes with the salt air. The discipline of the crew is impeccable. They are the enforcers of the Pax Britannica, and they are on their way to deal with a small group of upstart American soldiers who have planted a flag where it doesn't belong. Now shift your perspective. You are back on San Juan Island, standing beside Captain Pickett in his new earthen redoubt. It's been a few days since his landing. His men are still digging, improving their fortifications. They likely feel confident, secure in their position on the hill. Then you look out at the Haro Strait. A smudge of smoke appears on the horizon. Then another. The smudges grow larger, slowly resolving into the unmistakable shapes of ships. And not just any ships. These are warships. You watch as the 3 British vessels sail with majestic authority into Griffin Bay. They are a terrifying sight. The HMS Tribune alone is a monster, vastly outclassing the transport ship that brought the Americans here. The British ships maneuver into position, dropping anchor in a line, forming a naval cordon around the bay. Their movements are precise, professional, and utterly menacing. Then comes the most chilling moment of all. On all 3 ships, you hear the grinding of gears and the shouts of officers. The gun ports along the sides of the hull swing open, revealing the dark round mouths of dozens of cannons. The ships are cleared for action, and their guns are aimed directly at Pickett's camp on the hill. The strategic reality has shifted in a matter of hours. George Pickett's 66 men and their single lonely cannon are now staring down the barrels of more than 60 naval guns. Afloat in the bay are hundreds of sailors and a contingent of heavily armed Royal Marines who could be landed on the beach at a moment's notice. The swaggering confidence of a few days ago must be evaporating in the summer heat. The quiet, disputed island is now the scene of a tense, silent standoff between a tiny land force and a vastly superior naval squadron. The pig is now officially a casus belli. The only question left is who blinks first. The silence in Griffin Bay is deafening. You're standing on the hill in the American camp, the half-finished earthwork smelling of fresh soil. Below you, the 3 British warships sit like sleeping dragons on the water, their cannons a promise of unimaginable violence. A quiet tension grips Pickett's men. They watch the ships. From the decks of the warships, hundreds of British sailors and Marines watch them. It's a classic Western standoff, but with a navy. Everyone is waiting for someone to make a move. The fate of the island, and perhaps the relationship between 2 of the world's greatest powers, hangs in this still summer air. Finally, you see movement. A small boat, a captain's gig, is being lowered from the side of the flagship, HMS Tribune. As it hits the water, a sailor unfurls a small white flag. It's a flag of truce. The British aren't opening fire, at least not yet. They're going to talk first. You watch as a team of sailors, their oars rising and falling in perfect unison, rows the boat towards the shore. It's a scene of immaculate military precision, a stark contrast to the rustic half-wild island. A junior British officer, his uniform crisp and his posture ramrod straight, sits in the stern, a sealed envelope resting on his lap. He looks, you think, far too well dressed to be visiting a place whose primary dispute involves a pig. The boat lands. The officer disembarks, his polished boots sinking slightly into the wet sand. He is met by one of Pickett's men and escorted up the hill to the American camp. He delivers the envelope to Captain Pickett with a curt, professional salute, then waits. You're looking over Pickett's shoulder as he breaks the wax seal. The handwriting is elegant, the language formal. It's from Captain Geoffrey Hornby, commander of the British squadron. The message is polite, but the steel beneath the velvet glove is unmistakable. Hornby demands to know by what authority Captain Pickett and his troops have landed and established a camp on San Juan Island, a place he refers to in no uncertain terms as the territory of Her Britannic Majesty. You see a flicker of a smile on George Pickett's face. This is the moment he lives for. He is not intimidated, he is energized. He is being challenged, and he is more than ready to respond. He thanks the British officer and tells him a reply will be forthcoming. He then turns and, with a certain dramatic flair, sets about drafting his response. He is not just a soldier. He is a diplomat now, and his pen is his weapon. His reply is a masterclass in defiant patriotism. He writes that he is on the island by order of his commanding general and that the territory is not British, but the property of the United States. He states his purpose is simply to protect American citizens living here, and that he will remain until he is ordered to leave by his own government. He effectively takes Hornby's claims, crumples them up, and throws them right back in his face. Historians still argue whether Pickett's magnificent bravado was his own invention, or if he was following a secret set of instructions from the notoriously anti-British General Harney. Was he a rogue officer relishing a moment in the spotlight, or the perfect instrument of his general's aggressive foreign policy? The slow theatrical exchange continues. Pickett's reply is sealed and handed to one of his own officers, who is then rowed out to the Tribune. You can imagine the scene on the British flagship as Captain Hornby reads the American's defiant response. His polite inquiry has been met with an absolute refusal to yield. This upstart captain is not backing down. Frustrated, Hornby sends a second message, the language a little less polite this time. He points out his overwhelming naval superiority and strongly suggests that Pickett withdraw his forces to avoid a collision that would be painful for all involved. Painful is, of course, a very gentlemanly 19th century way of saying, "We will blow you and your tiny fort into smithereens." Pickett receives the second note, and his response becomes even more theatrical and resolute. He refuses to withdraw. He reportedly tells the British that if they choose to attack, he will fight them to the last man. He then raises the stakes of patriotic rhetoric by invoking the memory of the American Revolution, declaring that his men will make a Bunker Hill of it. It's an incredibly bold, almost suicidal statement. He is daring the most powerful navy on Earth to open fire, promising them a bloody fight if they do. The exchange of notes is over. The positions are clear and completely irreconcilable. The polite 19th century preliminaries have been concluded, and the possibility of actual 19th century violence is now very real. Captain Hornby, sitting in his cabin, has a decision to make. Does he call the Americans bluff? You are holding your breath. On the hill, Captain George Pickett and his men are braced for the first cannon shot. In the bay, Captain Jeffrey Hornby has his hand on the trigger, with the authority of the governor of the colony backing him up. One command from him, and the idyllic green hills of San Juan Island would be torn apart by a storm of iron and fire. One command and a war between Great Britain and the United States would begin, sparked by a stolen potato and a dead pig. The world waits. And then, nothing happens. The command is never given. To understand why, you have to step into the mind of Captain Hornby. You're in his cabin on the HMS Tribune. He's rereading Pickett's fantastically dramatic Bunker Hill message. He's also receiving increasingly strident communications from Governor Douglas back in Victoria, who is all but ordering him to land his Marines and settle this matter immediately. Hornby is a good officer. He is trained to follow the orders of the legitimate civil authority, but he is also a professional naval captain in the service of the Queen, not just her colonial governor. He is wrestling with a colossal question of jurisdiction. Does a colonial governor, in a fit of pique over a territorial squabble, have the authority to start a war that will be fought by sailors and soldiers across the globe and paid for in British and American blood? His professional judgment tells him no. In an act of profound career-risking sanity, Captain Hornby makes a decision. He will not open fire. He will not land his Marines. He will not, on his own authority, plunge two kindred nations into a catastrophic conflict. He recognizes that the situation on the ground, or rather on the island, is a political mess that needs to be sorted out by diplomats, not cannonballs. He decides his duty is to maintain the status quo. He will blockade the American position, prevent any reinforcements from landing, and urgently request instructions from his own direct superior, the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Station, Rear Admiral Lambert Baines. He has punted the decision up the chain of command. This single act of restraint sets the tone for everything that follows. With the immediate threat of annihilation lifted, a strange and surreal new reality begins to settle over the island. The standoff continues, but the character of it changes. It goes from a hair-trigger crisis to a tense, yet curiously polite, armed encampment. The British warships remain anchored in the bay, a constant, menacing reminder of the power they could unleash. The American soldiers continue to dig their fortifications, improving their little fort day by day. But then, the most bizarre thing starts to happen. You see another British gig being rowed ashore. It carries a young officer, but he's not delivering an ultimatum. He's carrying an invitation, or he's simply coming to pay a call. You watch as the British officer is welcomed into the American camp. He and Captain Pickett might sit on a log, share a cigar, and have a perfectly civil conversation about anything and everything, except for the fact that one of them is tasked with containing the other, who is currently occupying foreign land. This is where the quirky, unwritten rules of engagement begin. Both sides are run by professional officers who, despite the national dispute, share a common military culture. The social calls go both ways. An American officer might be invited aboard the HMS Tribune for a drink in the officer's wardroom. You can just imagine the scene. He's given a tour of the magnificent warship, shown the very cannons that are aimed at his friends on the hill, and then treated to a glass of fine British whiskey, all while engaging in courteous small talk. It's the military equivalent of two lawyers having a friendly lunch during a bitter court case. Historians still argue whether this remarkable period of restraint was a testament to the cool-headed professionalism of the officers on the scene, or simply a lucky byproduct of 19th century communications. Without a telegraph, Hornby and Pickett were isolated. Orders from their superiors would take days or weeks to arrive. Did this forced waiting period allow common sense to prevail? Or would they have been ordered to open fire long ago if an angry politician in London or Washington could have sent an instant message? Whatever the reason, an informal protocol is established. No surprise troop movements, no live fire drills that could be misinterpreted. Both sides tacitly agree to keep things calm and predictable, to ensure that a nervous sentry firing at a shadow doesn't accidentally start World War III Pig Edition. They have successfully contained the crisis that their political masters created. The soldiers and sailors have averted a war for now, and have settled into the most civilized military standoff in history. But the big question still hangs over them. What happens when the admirals and the generals finally weigh in? With the immediate threat of battle averted by the cool heads of the local commanders, a new and deeply strange rhythm begins to take hold on San Juan Island. The crisis has transformed into a routine. The sharp adrenaline of confrontation has faded into the dull ache of a prolonged, uncertain wait. You are now living in the surreal world of the Pig War standoff, where the days are marked not by cannon fire, but by endless digging and the brewing of tea. Let's spend a day with the Americans first. You're inside what the soldiers are calling Camp Pickett. The initial frantic digging has given way to a more systematic process of fortification. Under the summer sun, the men work with shovels and axes, expanding their earthen redoubt, clearing trees to create better fields of fire, and constructing a sturdy log blockhouse in the center. They are, in effect, building a permanent U.S. Army post on this disputed piece of land. Every shovelful of dirt is a quiet reinforcement of the American claim. But a soldier's life isn't all digging. There are the endless drills, the marching in formation, the practice of loading and presenting their rifles. There's guard duty, staring out at the intimidating but inactive British ships in the bay. And there is an enormous amount of downtime. With no enemy to fight, the greatest foe becomes boredom. So, to maintain morale, the men of Company D get creative. You might wander through the camp one evening and hear not the sounds of war, but the sounds of a theatrical rehearsal. The same soldiers who were prepared to make a Bunker Hill of it are now memorizing lines for a comedic play. On another night, they might organize a formal debate on some topic of the day, their voices ringing out in the quiet island air. It's a testament to the human ability to create normalcy in the most abnormal of situations. The camp also becomes the social and economic hub for the American settlers. The soldiers are a welcome source of security and commerce. You see the farmers' wives arriving with fresh milk, eggs, and vegetables to sell, a welcome change from the Army's standard rations of salted pork and hardtack. The soldiers, in turn, provide a sense of safety and a connection to the nation they've pledged allegiance to. The flag flying over Camp Pickett isn't just a challenge to the British, it's a profound comfort to the Americans living in its shadow. Now let's row out into the bay and see how the other half is living. Life for the British sailors and Royal Marines aboard their ships is a world away. It is a life of confinement, rigid discipline, and naval tradition. You're on the deck of the HMS Tribune as the morning bell rings. The day is a metronome of routine. There are gunnery drills, where the crews practice the complex ballet of running out the heavy cannons. There are sail drills even on a steam-powered ship. And there is the endless back-breaking work of keeping a warship immaculate, scrubbing the wooden decks with large sandstone blocks called holystones, polishing brass until it gleams, and painting over any sign of rust. Their primary mission is to watch. You can see officers on the quarterdeck, their telescopes trained on the American camp, observing every new fortification, every movement of troops. They are a contained, professional, observing force. And while the Americans can supplement their diet with fresh island produce, the British are entirely dependent on supply boats from their naval base. They live on Navy rations, which means the arrival of a boat with fresh water and letters from home is the most exciting event of the week. And of course, there is tea. The brewing and drinking of tea is a ritual that provides a small, civilized comfort in this tense, tedious waiting game. Historians still argue whether the peaceful, almost comfortable nature of this joint occupation was a deliberate, unstated policy from the commanders to keep things calm, or if it was simply the inevitable result of putting hundreds of bored young men in a field with no one to shoot at. Are they getting along because of strategy, or because it's just human nature to make the best of a weird situation? Either way, the two sides have settled into their roles. The Americans are like armed colonists, slowly becoming part of the landscape. The British are a floating garrison, detached and observant. But this strange, almost pastoral routine is fragile. While the soldiers and sailors are holding debates and polishing brass, their superiors are engaged in a furious war of words. The angry dispatches are flying between Governor Douglas and General Harney. The news of this standoff is slowly making its way east to Washington, D.C. and across the Atlantic to London. The men on the island may have found a temporary peace, but a political storm is gathering and they are sitting directly in its path. The quiet days of building forts and brewing tea are numbered. While the soldiers on San Juan Island are settling into their strange neighborly standoff, a very different mood prevails just a few miles away in the colonial capital of Victoria. The atmosphere there is anything but peaceful. You are now inside the office of Governor James Douglas, and the air is thick with frustration. He is receiving Captain Hornby's reports and he does not like what he is reading. The reports speak of a stalemate, of polite notes exchanged, of a situation being contained. To Douglas, contained is just another word for failure. The Americans are still there, their flag is still flying, they are digging in deeper every day, and his Royal Navy, the most powerful military force on the planet, is sitting in the bay doing absolutely nothing. In Douglas's mind, this is an unacceptable state of affairs. His authority is being undermined, not just by the upstart Americans, but by the maddeningly cautious professionals of his own military. So, he decides to escalate things through other means. If he can't drive the Americans out with cannonballs, perhaps he can drive them out with paperwork. You watch as he drafts an official, legally dense, and thoroughly indignant proclamation. Dated August 2nd, it formally declares San Juan Island to be the sovereign property of the British Crown, and lodges a thunderous protest against the armed force of the United States that has committed an act of trespass. It's the 19th century equivalent of posting a very angry cease and desist letter on a public forum. The document is sent under a flag of truce to Captain Pickett, who you can imagine reads it with a smirk, uses it to light his cigar and sends back a polite note saying he only takes orders from his own government. The proclamation is a complete failure. The Americans do not, in fact, read the legal notice, pack up their fort, and sail home in shame. The gesture only serves to make Douglas even more furious. His frustration now boils over into direct action. If his commanders won't come to the war, he will go to his commanders. You follow him as he storms out of his office, his face a mask of grim determination. He gets on a boat and makes the short journey from Victoria to the nearby naval base at Esquimalt. He is so personally invested, so enraged by the Navy's inaction, that he is going to confront the officers in person and bully them into obeying his orders. You arrive with him at the naval headquarters. Captain Hornby is there, but he's no longer the senior officer on the scene. His boss has arrived. He is Rear Admiral Robert L. Baines, the Commander-in-Chief of the entire Royal Navy Pacific Squadron. Baines is an old, seasoned veteran, a man who understands the vast global implications of his actions in a way that the regionally focused Governor Douglas simply cannot. You are now a fly on the wall for one of the most pivotal and heated confrontations of the entire affair. The governor, his civilian suit a stark contrast to the crisp naval uniforms, begins his tirade. He accuses the Navy of cowardice, of dereliction of duty. He insists that as the Queen's appointed representative, his orders are paramount. He demands to know why the American camp has not been swept from the island. He wants the Marines landed, the fort stormed, and the American flag torn down. He is, for all intents and purposes, giving a direct order to a rear admiral to start a war. As he fumes, you have to wonder what is truly driving him. Historians still argue whether James Douglas's aggressive, almost reckless stance was motivated by pure, selfless patriotism, or if his judgment was clouded by his other job. He is not just the governor. He is still deeply connected to the Hudson's Bay Company. The HBC stands to lose a strategically vital and profitable sheep ranch if the Americans win this dispute. Is he acting as a servant of the crown, defending the honor of the empire? Or is he acting as a corporate executive, using the Royal Navy to protect company assets? The line is impossibly blurry, and it adds a fascinating layer of intrigue to his red-faced demands. Admiral Baines listens to the governor's outburst with a cool, stoic patience. He is the embodiment of the old Navy, a man for whom discipline and a clear-eyed view of the strategic situation are everything. He hears the governor out, letting him vent his considerable fury. You can see the tension in the room, the clash of two powerful personalities and two conflicting worldviews. The colonial politician, focused on his small corner of the world, is demanding immediate violent action. The seasoned admiral, with a view of the entire globe, is weighing the consequences. Douglas finishes his rant. The order has been given. Attack the Americans. All eyes in the room now turn to Admiral Baines. The decision rests solely with him. Will he bow to the governor's authority and unleash his fleet, or will he commit a profound act of insubordination? The air in the Admiral A.S. office at Esquimalt is so thick with tension, you could cut it with a bayonet. Governor Douglas's demand, his direct order to attack, hangs in the silence. Captain Hornby and the other junior officers stand rigidly, their eyes fixed on their commander. The governor, flush with righteous fury, glares at the old admiral, waiting for his compliance. For a single terrifying moment, the fate of peace in the Western Hemisphere rests on the shoulders of one man, Rear Admiral Robert L. Baines. You look at Baines. He is not a man prone to rash decisions. He is a veteran of the sea, with a career stretching back to the great naval conflicts of the early 19th century. He served during the Napoleonic Wars and the War of 1812. This is a crucial detail. Unlike the younger men, and certainly unlike the civilian governor, Admiral Baines has seen firsthand what a real war between great powers looks like. He has seen decks slick with blood. He knows the horrific, world-altering cost of naval combat. He understands that war is not a tool to be used to settle a colonial governor's temper tantrum. His entire life experience has prepared him for this exact moment. He lets the silence stretch, a calculated move that quietly asserts his authority. He looks calmly at the governor, his expression unreadable. Then, he speaks. His voice is not loud, but it carries the immense weight of his rank and conviction. What he says next will echo through history, becoming the single most famous quote of this entire absurd affair. He looks Governor Douglas squarely in the eye and says, "To involve two great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig, I will not." The words land with the force of a broadside. You can see the anger instantly drain from Governor Douglas's face, replaced by slack-jawed disbelief. The collective posture of the junior officers in the room seems to relax, a wave of palpable relief washing over them. With that one sentence, Admiral Baines has drawn a line in the sand that not even the Queen's governor can cross. The military will not be bullied into starting a war. Baines then calmly and methodically explains his position, as if lecturing a particularly slow student. He informs the governor that the Royal Navy's duty is to protect British subjects and to prevent the Americans from escalating the situation further. They will maintain their blockade. They will not, however, be the aggressor. To land Marines and open fire on the regular soldiers of the United States Army, he explains, is an unambiguous act of war, and the authority to declare war does not rest with a colonial governor. It rests with Her Majesty's government in London, and London alone. He is, in the most polite and professional way possible, telling the governor that he has massively overstepped his authority. Historians still argue whether Admiral Baines's refusal was a heroic, personal act of insubordination that saved two nations from a catastrophic mistake, or if it was simply a cool, by-the-book execution of established military doctrine. Was he a moral hero, or just a very good employee following the company handbook? The truth is likely that it was a perfect fusion of the two. His personal experience gave him the wisdom to know that starting a war was a terrible idea, and the Navy's own rules gave him the authority and the justification he needed to defy the governor's reckless order. The confrontation is over. Governor Douglas is utterly defeated. He has no recourse. The Navy will not obey him. He sputters a few more protests, but the fire has gone out of him. He has been completely outmaneuvered by the calm, resolute admiral. There is nothing left for him to do but retreat. You watch him leave the naval base, a man diminished. His plan to solve the San Juan problem with a short, sharp shock in tatters. With the governor gone, Admiral Baines issues his own set of clear, sensible orders to his captains. The fleet will remain in Griffin Bay. They are to allow Pickett S. Company to remain unmolested, but are to prevent any more American troops or supplies from reaching the island. No one gets on, and no one gets off. He has transformed a potential flashpoint into a simple, non-violent, and incredibly boring siege. His decisive inaction is the turning point of the Pig War. The immediate military crisis, the moment where the whole affair could have spun out of control, has passed. The pig will not have its war. Now finally, with the cannons muzzled by a wise old admiral, the politicians and diplomats thousands of miles away will be forced to do their jobs. Back on San Juan Island, the strange, peaceful standoff has become the new normal. The American soldiers are improving their fort, the British sailors are polishing their cannons, and the officers are exchanging polite, if wary, social calls. But this entire drama is taking place inside a bubble of isolation, while the players on the island know every detail of the crisis. The men who actually run the country have no idea it's even happening. In 1859, news travels at the speed of a steamship, not the speed of light. You are now accompanying a leather dispatch pouch, the physical embodiment of this news. It contains General Harney's official report on the situation, and it is beginning a long and ponderous journey eastward. First, a military vessel carries it from the Washington Territory down the coast to the bustling port of San Francisco. From there, it might be handed off to a stagecoach on the overland route, or more likely, placed on another steamer heading south to Panama. After crossing the isthmus by rail, it's put on yet another ship steaming for the East Coast, where it finally mercifully connects with the telegraph network for the last leg of its journey to Washington, D.C. All told, this relay race of information takes nearly 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, the President of the United States remains blissfully unaware that one of his generals has brought him to the brink of war. The scene shifts. It is now mid-September in Washington, D.C. The air is thick, not just with the late summer humidity, but with a palpable, choking political tension. The United States is not a healthy country. It is a nation sick with the fever of the slavery debate, a nation tearing itself apart at the seams. In a few short weeks, an abolitionist named John Brown will lead a raid on the federal armory at Harper's Ferry, an event that will be a point of no return on the road to civil war. The country is a powder keg, and everyone in the Capitol knows it. Into this cauldron of domestic crisis steps the President, James Buchanan. You see him in his office in the White House, an aging, weary figure, a man visibly stooped by the weight of a fracturing nation. Buchanan is a notoriously cautious and indecisive leader, a Northerner who is deeply sympathetic to the South, a so-called doughface. His entire presidency is a desperate and ultimately failed attempt to compromise and placate, to avoid confrontation at all costs and somehow hold the Union together. The very last thing a man like James Buchanan wants to deal with is a pointless, distracting, and potentially catastrophic foreign war. And then the dispatch from General Harney finally arrives. You can imagine the scene at the War Department as the clerks decode the telegraphed message. Then the report is rushed to the White House, where it lands on the President's desk. He and his Secretary of State, the elderly Lewis Cass, read it, and you can see the color drain from their faces. Their expressions likely shift from confusion to disbelief, and then to outright horror. General Harney has done what? He has unilaterally ordered a military occupation of a disputed island. He has faced down the Royal Navy. And the inciting incident for this potentially cataclysmic international showdown was a pig? It must sound like a joke, a grotesque, dangerous joke. Harney's report, of course, paints his own actions in the most heroic light possible. He is the decisive commander, protecting vulnerable American families from British tyranny. Historians still argue whether Harney's reports were a reasonably factual, if biased, account of the situation, or if they were a deliberately embellished and self-aggrandizing narrative, carefully crafted to force the president's hand and make a withdrawal politically impossible. Whatever the spin, Buchanan is now in an impossible position. He has a rogue general, operating thousands of miles from any meaningful oversight, who has single-handedly engineered a crisis with the world's foremost military power. He cannot possibly condone Harney's actions. It is a reckless, insubordinate overreach of his authority. But he also can't simply order an immediate and humiliating withdrawal. The press would have a field day. He'd be portrayed as a coward, abandoning American citizens to the British. It would be political suicide. You can almost hear the frantic, panicked conversations in the White House. They have to get this under control. They need to de-escalate, and fast. They need to open a diplomatic back-channel with the British to reassure them that this is the action of an overzealous general, not a deliberate policy of the US government. And most importantly, they need to send someone out there, someone senior, someone with the authority and the wisdom to clean up Harney's mess. The search begins for a man who can be trusted to travel to the remote Pacific Northwest and pull both nations back from the brink of a war that nobody, save for perhaps one pig, had ever asked for. While President Buchanan and his cabinet are in a state of controlled panic in Washington, D.C., you have to remember that the news of this pig-based crisis is on an even longer journey to the other side of the Atlantic. The dispatches from Governor Douglas and Admiral Baines have to travel all the way across North America, and then board a fast mail steamer for a 10 to 12-day voyage across the ocean to Great Britain. By the time the story reaches London, the standoff on San Juan Island has been a daily reality for the better part of 2 months. The world's first near real-time global news crisis, this was not. You arrive in London in the autumn of 1859. This is the undisputed capital of the world, the heart of a sprawling global empire. The city is a marvel of Victorian power and confidence, choked with the smoke of industry and the clatter of horse-drawn carriages. At the center of it all is the government at Westminster, a collection of men who are accustomed to dealing with wars, rebellions, and diplomatic intrigues on every continent. A squabble on a tiny, damp island on the far side of the world is, to put it mildly, not typically at the top of their agenda. The man at the head of this government is the Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston. He is the very picture of John Bull, a blustering, fiercely nationalist leader famous for his gunboat diplomacy. The policy of sending a warship or two to solve any pesky foreign problem. His gut instinct is always to be tough, to never back down, to show the world the strength of the British lion. But tempering Palmerston's aggressive instincts is his foreign secretary, the shrewd and experienced Lord John Russell. Russell is a pragmatist, a man who understands that a pointless war is the most expensive kind of diplomacy. This internal tension between the hawk and the dove will shape Britain's entire response. The dispatches finally land on Lord Russell's desk in the Foreign Office. You can imagine him, perhaps adjusting his spectacles and reading the increasingly frantic reports from Governor Douglas, followed by the calm, professional assessment from Admiral Baines. And just like his American counterparts, his first reaction must be one of sheer, unadulterated disbelief. He is managing complex relations with France, keeping a wary eye on Russia, and overseeing a global empire, and he is now being told that the British and American armies are facing off, with cannons loaded, because a farmer shot a pig. The sheer absurdity of it must have been breathtaking, but once the initial shock wears off, a more pragmatic assessment takes over. The British government is, of course, annoyed. They are annoyed with their own governor, James Douglas, for his hot-headed escalations. They are annoyed with the American general, William Harney, for his unilateral invasion. They are deeply concerned that these two men, left to their own devices, could blunder their way into a war that nobody in London or Washington actually wants. And the reasons they don't want a war are deeply practical. For one, there's the economy. You have to remember that the mighty British textile industry, the engine of the Industrial Revolution, is almost entirely dependent on one thing: cotton from the American South. A war with the United States would mean a naval blockade, cutting off that vital cotton supply. The mills in Lancashire and Manchester would fall silent. Hundreds of thousands of British workers would be thrown out of their jobs. The British economy would be devastated. Starting a war over a pig wasn't just geopolitically stupid, it was fiscal suicide. Historians still argue whether this cool-headed economic pragmatism was the primary driver of the British response, or if it was simply a matter of priorities. At the time, Britain was far more concerned with events in Europe, particularly the rise of Napoleon III in France, then with a border dispute in North America. To them, the pig war was an irritating, faintly embarrassing distraction from the real business of global power politics. So, a decision is made in the halls of Westminster. Lord Palmerston might have grumbled a bit, wanting to teach the Yankees a lesson, but Lord Russell's cautious approach wins the day. This is a mess that must be cleaned up, not escalated. A message is sent to the British ambassador in Washington, the highly capable Lord Lyons. He is instructed to meet with the American Secretary of State immediately. The message is firm. Great Britain does not, under any circumstances, relinquish its claim to the San Juan Islands. However, Her Majesty's government is in full agreement that this ridiculous situation must be resolved peacefully and diplomatically. They are essentially sending a message to the White House that says, "Look, our man on the scene is a hothead, and your man on the scene is a hothead. Let's, as the responsible adults in the room, sort this out before they do something truly idiotic." The response from London is not a roar of the lion, but a weary sigh of exasperated common sense. Back in Washington, D.C., the Buchanan administration has a massive problem in the Pacific Northwest, and they need a fixer. They need someone with the gravitas to negotiate with the British, the diplomatic skill to find a peaceful solution, and most critically, enough raw authority to slap down the belligerent General Harney and make it stick. Sending a civilian diplomat would be a mistake. Harney could easily obstruct them with military bureaucracy. Sending a junior general would be an insult. They need to send the biggest gun they have. And in the United States Army of 1859, there is no bigger gun than the General-in-Chief himself, Lieutenant General Winfield Scott. You have to understand who Winfield Scott is. He is a living legend, a military giant who has served in every major American conflict for nearly half a century. He was a young hero in the War of 1812, the brilliant architect of the American victory in the Mexican-American War, and the commanding general of the entire army. His rank is so high that no other officer, not even a hot-headed department commander like Harney, can question his orders. He is, in short, the perfect man for the job. Except for one small detail. He is 73 years old, suffers from vertigo, and is, to put it politely, enormous. Scott reportedly weighed well over 300 pounds at this point in his life. His own soldiers had affectionately and accurately nicknamed him Old Fuss and Feathers due to his legendary vanity, his obsession with elaborate, showy uniforms, and his strict, almost comical adherence to military protocol. You can just picture him, a colossal, aging, gloriously uniformed hero who now has to undertake an arduous month-long journey to a remote corner of the continent to sort out a mess started by a pig. Historians still argue whether President Buchanan's choice of Scott was a stroke of strategic genius or an act of sheer desperation. On the one hand, sending the nation's top soldier was the clearest possible signal to the British that the U.S. government was serious about de-escalation. It also guaranteed that General Harney would be brought to heel. On the other hand, sending a 73-year-old man in precarious health on a 4,000-mile journey involving ships and rugged overland travel was a tremendous gamble. But the decision is made. President Buchanan summons Scott to the White House and gives him his mission: travel to the Washington Territory, investigate the situation, and negotiate a temporary peaceful settlement with the British governor that will allow both sides to stand down their forces, pending a final diplomatic resolution. He is, essentially, being sent as the president's personal, very large peace envoy. And so, the great general begins his journey. It is a grueling ordeal. You're with him as he travels by ship, the sea voyage likely doing no favors for his vertigo. You see him crossing the Isthmus of Panama, a journey through a sweltering tropical jungle that must have been torture for a man of his size and age. Then, another long sea voyage up the Pacific coast. Every mile of the journey is a testament to his sense of duty. As he travels, news of his mission precedes him. You can imagine the feeling in General Harney's headquarters when he receives the dispatch informing him that General-in-Chief Scott is on his way, personally, to inspect his handiwork. The swaggering confidence must have evaporated pretty quickly. This is the 19th century equivalent of getting a surprise visit from the CEO of the entire corporation after you've started a fire in the branch office. For the British, the news is a welcome relief. Admiral Baines and even Governor Douglas would have recognized Scott's name and reputation. They know him as a tough but honorable professional, and his arrival is a clear sign that the adults in the American government are finally taking charge. In late October, after a journey that has lasted the better part of a month, Winfield Scott finally arrives in the Pacific Northwest, landing at Fort Vancouver. He is exhausted, but he is there. The great peacemaker has reached the scene of the crime. He immediately begins issuing orders and sending messages, his immense authority felt across the entire region before he even sets foot on San Juan Island. The local players who have driven this crisis, Pickett, Harney, and Douglas, are about to become supporting actors in their own drama. Old Fuss and Feathers has arrived to restore order, and not a moment too soon. General Winfield Scott has arrived, and you can feel the entire atmosphere of the Pacific Northwest shift. The air of crisis begins to dissipate, replaced by the calm, commanding presence of Old Fuss and Feathers. From his temporary headquarters at Fort Vancouver, he sets about untangling the knot that his subordinates have tied. He doesn't rush. He moves with the deliberate, unshakable confidence of a man whose authority is absolute. His first order of business is to get his own house in order. He sends a dispatch to Captain George Pickett on San Juan Island. It's a masterful piece of military management, praising the young captain for his gallant and soldier-like conduct, while also making it crystal clear that the situation is now under new management, and Pickett is to take no further action without direct orders from Scott himself. It's a pat on the head and a tightening of the leash, all in one. He then sends a much frostier message to the man who started it all, General Harney, formally rebuking him for his recklessness and relieving him of any authority in the San Juan matter. With a few strokes of his pen, Scott has reined in his rogue subordinates. Now he turns his attention to the British. But Winfield Scott is not a man for casual face-to-face negotiations. He is a creature of protocol and formality. Instead of sailing to Victoria to meet with Governor Douglas, he sets up his command post and begins a campaign of diplomacy by letter. You can picture him at his desk, a huge man hunched over a piece of fine stationery, composing his first overture to his British counterpart. Each sentence is carefully crafted, the language eloquent and deferential, a perfect embodiment of his fuss and feathers persona. The letter is carried by an aide across the water and delivered into the hands of Governor Douglas. Douglas, still smarting from his showdown with Admiral Baines, is likely wary. But as he reads Scott's words, his posture must soften. The letter is incredibly respectful. Scott acknowledges the long history of friendship between the two nations. He speaks of their shared values, and he laments the pitiable squabble that has brought them to this unfortunate impasse. He is offering Douglas an honorable way out, a ladder to climb down from the very tall tree he has found himself in. Douglas, recognizing a genuine and powerful peacemaker when he sees one, responds in kind. The slow, formal, and wonderfully polite exchange of letters begins. It's a diplomatic dance conducted via mailboat. In his next letter, Scott lays out his elegant solution, the proposal that will finally end the crisis. He suggests that since both nations have a legitimate interest in the island pending a final border settlement, and since a war is obviously out of the question, they should simply agree to share it peacefully. He proposes a mutual and dramatic reduction of forces. The powerful British fleet, he suggests, should withdraw. The American reinforcements, which Harney had foolishly called up, should be sent home. In their place, Scott proposes a temporary joint military occupation. The agreement is specific. The United States will be allowed to maintain a single company of infantry on the island, with its numbers never to exceed 100 men. In turn, Great Britain will be allowed to land a single detachment of Royal Marines, also capped at 100 men. Both flags would fly, both nations would be present, both sides could claim they had not backed down. It is a stroke of diplomatic genius. For the British, it's a victory because they finally get to land their own troops, formally establishing their presence and ending the exclusive and illegal American occupation. For the Americans, it's also a victory because the presence of their troops, the very act of invasion that started the military crisis, is now formally accepted and legitimized by the British. Historians still argue whether Scott's proposal was a truly equitable compromise or a quiet American victory disguised as a handshake. Did he cleverly trick the British into officially sanctioning the U.S. military presence, thus strengthening the American claim in the long run? Or was it simply the most practical solution available? Either way, it works. Governor Douglas, seeing the wisdom and the face-saving nature of the plan, agrees. The deal is struck. The orders are issued. You watch as the great British warships hoist their anchors and sail out of Griffin Bay, their mission of intimidation rendered obsolete. Only one small vessel remains to keep watch. On the American side, Pickett's company is officially designated as the caretaker force. The pig war crisis is officially over. It has ended not with a bang, not even with a whimper, but with a meticulously polite, formally signed agreement to share. A joint occupation is born, and the stage is set for one of the strangest and most peaceful military arrangements in history. The agreement brokered by the formidable Winfield Scott has fundamentally changed the reality on San Juan Island. The crisis is over. The threat of war has vanished like the morning mist off the water. Now comes the long, strange, and almost entirely peaceful aftermath. The American fort, Camp Pickett, is now an officially sanctioned military post. All that remains is for the British to land their own token force and begin the unprecedented joint occupation. You have to wait a few months, until March of 1860. A British warship appears in the waters around the island, but this time its presence causes no alarm. It drops anchor not in Griffin Bay near the American camp, but at a sheltered cove on the far northern end of the island. You watch from the shore as boats begin to ferry ashore a company of Royal Marines. These are the elite amphibious troops of the British Empire, renowned for their discipline and professionalism. They are not here to fight, they are here to coexist. Their commander makes a very wise first decision. He establishes the British camp a full 13 miles away from the Americans, at the place we now call Garrison Bay. This physical separation is the secret ingredient to the success of the whole endeavor. It's not a single integrated peacekeeping camp where tensions could fester. It's two distinct sovereign military bases on one small island, allowing each side to maintain its own routines, its own culture, and its own space. It's the geopolitical equivalent of having a roommate you get along with, but only because you have separate bathrooms. The construction of the British camp is a study in contrast with the American fort, where the Americans had hastily thrown up an earthen redoubt designed for defense. The Royal Marines build something that looks altogether more permanent and civilized. They erect neat, whitewashed wooden barracks, a proper cookhouse, separate quarters for officers, and a small parade ground. It has the feel of a proper colonial station, an orderly slice of England transplanted into the Pacific Northwest. And then they add the most wonderfully British touch of all. One of the first major projects the Marines undertake is the planting of a formal English garden. You can see them tilling the soil not for potatoes but for flowers. They lay out manicured paths and carefully tended flower beds. It is a profound statement of intent. They are not here to merely survive or to fight. They are here to impose British order and culture on their little patch of wilderness. While the Americans have their rustic functional fort, the British have their barracks and their rose bushes. With both camps established, the island settles into a remarkable period of stability that will last for 13 years. Two rival empires, represented by two professional military units, are now sharing a disputed territory under a formal, if slightly bizarre, truce. And the reason this awkward peace holds for so long has less to do with the soldiers on the ground and more to do with the world outside. Historians still argue whether the stunningly peaceful nature of the occupation was a result of the innate discipline and good sense of the soldiers and Marines, or if it was simply a case of benign neglect from their governments. The truth is that just as this joint occupation was finding its footing, the world's attention was violently captured by much, much bigger events. Barely a year after the British camp is established, the United States plunges into the abyss of its own civil war. The government in Washington is now consumed with a fight for the very survival of the nation. The question of who owns a remote island populated by sheep is, to put it mildly, the very last thing on Abraham Lincoln's mind. The small garrison on San Juan is a forgotten outpost in a nation at war with itself. George Pickett himself, the flamboyant captain who started it all, would soon leave to join the Confederacy and march toward his infamous destiny at Gettysburg. Great Britain, too, has other concerns. The government in London is navigating the treacherous waters of European power politics, keeping a wary eye on a resurgent France and a rising Prussia. They are managing a global empire with constant challenges and crises. The San Juan question is a settled, stable non-issue. It is a file that gets placed at the very bottom of a very tall stack of more pressing problems. The pig has been forgotten, and so, the pig war gives way to the pig peace. The island becomes a geopolitical oddity, a forgotten backwater where the soldiers of two rival powers are left almost entirely to their own devices. Their governments may have drawn lines on a map, but here on the ground those lines are about to get very, very blurry. With the two military camps established at a safe distance and their respective governments thoroughly distracted by more pressing matters, the soldiers on San Juan Island are left in a peculiar state of limbo. They are an occupying force with no one to occupy, a garrison with no enemy to fight. And so, in the face of profound, soul-crushing boredom, they do the most natural thing in the world. They start making friends with the enemy. At first, the interactions are tentative. You might see a lone American soldier out hunting deer who claims to have gotten lost and finds himself near the British camp. Instead of being taken prisoner, he's greeted with curiosity. A Royal Marine might offer him a swig of rum from a flask, share a bit of tobacco, and point him back in the right direction. These small, unofficial encounters build a foundation of trust. The men on both sides quickly realize they have far more in common with each other than they do with the politicians who sent them here. Soon, the informal visits become a regular occurrence. The 13-mile road that connects the two camps becomes a well-trodden path. You see off-duty American soldiers walking in 2s and 3s up to the British barracks, and vice versa. The canteens, or grog shops, at each camp become the social hubs. Imagine the scene. A smoky room filled with men in different uniforms, blue and red, sharing pints of beer, playing cards, and complaining about the exact same things: the terrible food, the endless drills, the rainy weather, and the officers who never seem to be satisfied. There are even official reports of soldiers getting a little too friendly with the enemy's liquor supply and having to be cheerfully escorted home by their cross-national drinking buddies. But the real symbol of this extraordinary friendship is how they handle their national holidays. This is where the spirit of cooperation reaches its beautiful and frankly hilarious peak. You're at the American camp on the 4th of July. It's a big celebration. The Stars and Stripes is raised with patriotic fervor. There are speeches about liberty and independence from the very British tyranny that a company of British Marines is supposed to represent. And who is standing respectfully in attendance, with their hats off during the flag raising? A delegation of Royal Marines, invited as honored guests. They then join the Americans for a massive celebratory feast, a picnic to commemorate the day the Americans violently rejected British rule. Now fast forward a few months to the Queen's birthday. You're at the British camp. Everything is spit and polish. The Union Jack is hoisted, cannons fire a royal salute, and the Marines give 3 hearty cheers for Queen Victoria. And who is standing alongside them cheering just as loudly? A delegation of American soldiers who then join the British for a feast and a toast to the health of a monarch their country was founded in opposition to. This happens every year. They are not just tolerating each other. They are actively celebrating each other's national identities. The camaraderie extends to sports. The men organize joint competitions to pass the time. You might see a fiercely contested horse race along one of the island's beaches, or a very lopsided game of cricket, with the Americans gamely trying to figure out the rules. Historians still argue whether this deep fraternization was a sign of a true, profound friendship that transcended national loyalty, or if it was more a pragmatic alliance against the common enemy of isolation and boredom. Were they friends, or just lonely colleagues? It was almost certainly both. They were professional soldiers who respected each other's skill and discipline, and they were also young men stuck on a remote island with no one else to talk to. This culture of peace becomes institutional. Over the 13 years of the joint occupation, several different American and British units rotate through San Juan Island, but with each new rotation, The departing company passes down the unwritten rules to the new arrivals. These guys are okay. We don't fight them. We drink with them. The pig peace becomes the established tradition. What started as a tense military standoff has morphed into a small, functional international community. For over a decade, the soldiers who were sent here to potentially kill each other have instead chosen to build a society based on mutual respect, shared holidays, and copious amounts of alcohol. But while they are enjoying their idyllic, forgotten peace, the world outside is changing. The American Civil War ends. The gears of government in London and Washington begin to turn again. And that dusty old file labeled San Juan boundary dispute is about to be pulled from the bottom of the drawer. While the soldiers and Marines on San Juan Island are busy perfecting their international sports leagues and comparing brewing techniques, the world outside their peaceful bubble has continued to turn. 13 years is a long time. The American Civil War has been fought and won. The nation, scarred but unified, is now entering a period of rapid industrial growth and is becoming a major world power. In Great Britain, the Victorian era is at its zenith, a time of immense imperial confidence. With the great crises of the 1860s now in the past, the diplomats in London and Washington finally have the time and the inclination to do some spring cleaning. And that means eventually someone pulls out a dusty old file labeled "That Absurd Pig Business in the Pacific Northwest." You are now far from the rustic camps of San Juan. You're in a stuffy wood-paneled office in either the U.S. State Department or the British Foreign Office. It doesn't matter which, the atmosphere is the same. Men in dark suits are unrolling the same old maps, pointing to the same two channels and making the same tired arguments. One side insists that the main channel in the 1846 treaty obviously means the Haro Strait. The other insists, with equal conviction, that it could only ever mean the Rosario Strait. The deadlock that existed in 1859 is still firmly in place. Over the years, various common-sense compromises had been floated. At one point, a proposal was made to just split the difference, give some of the smaller islands to Britain and the main island of San Juan to the United States. This perfectly reasonable solution was flatly rejected by both sides. Why? Because the dispute was no longer about practicality, it was about principle. Both nations had invested so much national pride in their own legal interpretation of that one vague phrase in the treaty that to compromise would be to admit they might have been wrong. And for two proud, stubborn world powers, that was simply not going to happen. It was all or nothing. Historians still argue whether this decade-long delay was a result of this genuine, intractable legal puzzle, or if the two powers were deliberately stalling for time. The United States, for its part, may have been happy to let the issue simmer. With each passing year, more and more American civilians were settling on the islands, strengthening the U.S. facts on the ground and making their claims seem more and more natural. But by the late 1860s, both sides were ready for a resolution. This unresolved border was a persistent, low-grade irritant in the relationship between two nations that increasingly needed each other as economic partners. So, in 1871, a high-level commission meets in Washington, D.C., to hammer out a whole raft of outstanding issues. Their work results in a landmark agreement, the Treaty of Washington. It deals with major problems like fishing rights and financial claims left over from the Civil War. And buried deep within its articles, in Article 34, is the plan to finally, once and for all, solve the San Juan question. The article is, in essence, a formal admission of defeat by both sides. It is a document where two of the proudest nations on Earth officially state that they are incapable of resolving this dispute on their own. They have argued themselves into a corner from which there is no escape. Therefore, they agree to do something radical. They will hand the entire problem over to a neutral third-party arbitrator. They will both present their cases and they will agree in advance that whatever this arbitrator decides will be final and absolutely binding. No appeals, no do-overs. It's the ultimate diplomatic kicking it upstairs. This is a monumental step. It signifies a shift from confrontation to litigation. The question is no longer who has more soldiers or more warships, but who has the better legal argument. And now the only remaining question is, Who on earth do you trust to be an impartial judge between the British Empire and the United States of America? You can't ask the French or the Spanish or the Russians. You need someone powerful, respected, and most importantly, someone with no direct stake in the outcome. They find their man. The Treaty of Washington specifies that the final arbitrator for the San Juan boundary dispute will be His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm I, and so the fate of a quiet island on the other side of the world, a place of peaceful soldiers and friendly sporting events, a story that began with a hungry pig in a potato patch is now to be decided in a palace in Berlin by the newly crowned leader of a unified Germany. The stage is set for the final, and perhaps the most improbable act of this long-running play. And so the scene of our story makes its most dramatic shift yet. You leave the quiet, rain-swept shores of San Juan Island, with its friendly soldiers and pastoral scenery, and travel thousands of miles to the heart of a newly forged empire. You are in Berlin, the capital of Imperial Germany. The year is 1872. This is a city of crisp uniforms, spiked helmets, and immense industrial and military power. And it is here, in a royal palace, that the fate of the pig war will finally be decided. The man tasked with making this decision is Kaiser Wilhelm I. He is an old, stern, imposing figure, the very embodiment of Prussian discipline and militarism. Having just unified Germany through a series of brilliant and brutal wars, he is now one of the most powerful men on the planet. And he has graciously agreed to mediate this peculiar, long-running squabble between his English-speaking cousins. You might imagine him poring over maps of the Pacific Northwest, but the truth is a little more bureaucratic. An emperor, after all, delegates. Kaiser Wilhelm does not, in fact, personally listen to the arguments. He appoints a special three-man arbitration commission to handle the details. He chooses three of the finest minds in his new empire, a brilliant legal expert, a renowned geographer, and a seasoned diplomat. Their instructions are simple. Travel to the neutral city of Geneva, Switzerland. Listen to the arguments presented by the British and the Americans. Study all the evidence, and then present him with their final binding recommendation. The Kaiser will simply sign off on their findings. The scene shifts again. You are now in a quiet, stately room in Geneva. The atmosphere is sober and academic. The loud, angry arguments of soldiers and politicians have been replaced by the quiet rustle of paper and the low, measured tones of legal debate. This is the final court of appeals. The British send a high-powered legal team, including admirals who can speak with authority on maritime navigation. Their case is straightforward and practical. They argue that the Rosario Strait, the channel closer to the American mainland, was the one most commonly used by their Hudson's Bay Company ships in the 1840s. It was the established primary channel of commerce, and therefore, it is the channel referred to in the treaty. Then comes the American representative, and he is not what you might expect. The U.S. has sent George Bancroft, a distinguished historian and diplomat, a scholar in his late 60s. Bancroft is not a typical lawyer. He is a storyteller, a man who understands that the best arguments are rooted in deep historical context. He has served as the American ambassador to Germany, so he knows his audience, and he comes prepared. You watch as his aides bring in his presentation, a massive 6-volume collection of documents, maps, and historical analysis that he has personally compiled. It is a scholarly weapon of overwhelming force. Bancroft's argument is elegant. He concedes that British commercial ships may have often used the Rosario Strait. But, he argues, the treaty was not about defining a shipping lane. It was about defining a major international boundary. The true boundary, he insists, is the deeper, wider, and more geographically significant Haro Strait. He then produces a series of maps, including several drawn by British and Spanish captains before the treaty was signed, that clearly label the Haro Strait as the primary channel, the Canal de Haro. He argues that this was the boundary the original treaty makers had in mind, even if their wording was sloppy. You watch the 3 German commissioners as they listen to all of this. They sit impassively, asking sharp, intelligent questions. They are the picture of impartiality. But you have to wonder about the subtext. Historians still argue whether the German commission was truly neutral. This is, after all, 1872. The newly unified Germany is now a major rival to the British Empire. Is it possible that the German commissioners felt a slight, unspoken satisfaction at the prospect of ruling against the dominant global power of the age? Were they just dispassionate judges, or was there a subtle political thumb on the scale? After weeks of presentations and arguments, the two sides rest their cases. The legal teams pack up their papers and go home. The fate of San Juan Island now rests entirely in the hands of these three German experts. They retire to a private room to deliberate, surrounded by a mountain of maps, charts, ship's logs, and George Bancroft's 6 volumes of history. The final word in the story that began with a shot in a potato garden will be written here, in a quiet room, thousands of miles from where the trouble ever began. You are now a ghost in the deliberation room in Geneva. The doors are closed. The public arguments are over. It is just 3 men, 3 of the finest minds in Germany, tasked with untangling a knot that has been tightening for a quarter of a century. The room is a sea of paper. There are stacks of legal briefs, ship's logs, letters from diplomats, and most importantly, dozens of maps and nautical charts spread across a massive table. The air is heavy with the scent of old paper and intense concentration. Let's meet the commission. You have the jurist, a man obsessed with the letter of the law. You have the geographer, a man who sees the world in terms of depths, currents, and coastlines. And you have the diplomat, a man who understands that any decision must be politically sound and lead to a lasting peace. Their 3 perspectives are about to be fused into one final judgment. The jurist speaks first. You watch him tap a long, bony finger on a copy of the 1846 Oregon Treaty. The text, he says, his voice dry and precise, reads through the middle of the said channel. He argues that the British have a compelling point. If their ships were using the Rosario Strait as the primary commercial route at the time, then a reasonable person would conclude that this was the said channel. It's a logical, text-based argument, and for a moment it seems unassailable. Then the geographer clears his throat. He gestures for the others to look at a large nautical chart of the region. Logic is one thing, gentlemen, he says, but geography is another. He traces the 2 channels with a brass ruler. He points out that while Rosario might be a convenient shipping lane, the Haro Strait is objectively the far more significant body of water. It is deeper. It is wider. It carries a much greater volume of water from the Strait of Georgia to the Strait of Juan de Fuca. If one is looking for a true, natural, international boundary, he declares, Haro is the only logical choice. It is the real dividing line between the continent and the great island of Vancouver. The debate now turns to the historical maps, the physical evidence from the time of the treaty. This is where things get truly messy. The British lawyers had produced a key document, the Mitchell Map, which was known to have been used in other British-American treaty negotiations. They argued it supported their claim. The Americans in turn produced other maps from the same era that seemed to support theirs. The commissioners are now engaged in a frustrating map-off, trying to decipher the intentions of men long dead based on the imprecise, often contradictory cartography of the 1840s. It becomes clear that the maps, like the treaty's text, are too ambiguous to provide a definitive answer. The jurist and the geographer are at an impasse. The law is unclear, and the geography is open to interpretation. This is where the diplomat, who has been listening patiently, finally steps in. Gentlemen, he says, leaning forward, perhaps we are asking the wrong question. We cannot know for certain what the treaty makers of 1846 intended, but we can know what is required to create a stable and lasting peace now. He raises a point that has not been part of the formal legal arguments, the reality on the ground. Historians still argue whether this de facto situation was the deciding factor, or if the ruling was based purely on the legal and geographical merits. But the diplomat's argument is powerful. He points out that San Juan Island, after nearly 2 decades of American settlement and 13 years of joint occupation, is now culturally and demographically American. The majority of the farms, the majority of the civilian population, the entire nascent economy is American. If we award this island to Great Britain, the diplomat might be saying, we are not solving a problem. We are creating a new one. We would be ordering the removal of an established community, sowing the seeds for future resentment and conflict. Is that a wise course of action? You can see his logic beginning to sway the others. The geographer's powerful argument for the Haro Strait as the most natural boundary, combined with the diplomat's pragmatic assessment of the need for a stable peace, creates a compelling case. The jurist, realizing that a strict interpretation of the law only leads to more ambiguity, concedes that a broader view is necessary. A consensus begins to form in the quiet of the room. They have examined the treaty, they have analyzed the charts, and they have considered the human consequences. One of them picks up a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. They begin to draft their official recommendation to be sent to Kaiser Wilhelm II in Berlin. The deliberation is over. The verdict is in. All that remains is for the emperor to sign his name and make it the final word. The recommendation from the three wise men in Geneva now travels to the imperial palace in Berlin. You can imagine it, a crisp, formal document, sealed with wax, making its way to the desk of the most powerful man in Europe. Kaiser Wilhelm III, the old Prussian emperor, reviews the findings of the commission he appointed. Their conclusion is clear, their reasoning sound. He picks up his pen, dips it in the inkwell, and signs his name with a flourish. With that single stroke, a border is drawn, a dispute is settled, and an island's fate is sealed. The date is October 21st, 1872. The verdict is dispatched immediately to the respective embassies. You are with the American diplomat, the elderly historian George Bancroft, in his office in Berlin. A messenger arrives with a note from the German foreign minister. Bancroft opens it, and you see a look of profound satisfaction cross his face. After all the years of research, the 6 volumes of argumentation, the endless debates over maps and channels, he has been vindicated. His belief in the power of historical evidence to solve a present-day crisis has been proven right. It is the crowning achievement of a long and brilliant career. He has won the Pig War not with a sword, but with a library. The Kaiser's decision is simple, direct, and unambiguous. The Arbitration Commission, having weighed all the evidence, found the American case to be the more sound. The Treaty of 1846, they concluded, intended for the boundary to be drawn through the Haro Strait. Therefore, the entire San Juan archipelago, including the main island of San Juan itself, belongs to the United States of America. The news travels across the new transatlantic telegraph cable. In Washington, D.C., the administration of President Ulysses S. Grant erupts in celebration. It is a major diplomatic victory, a confirmation of American sovereignty, and another successful chapter in the story of manifest destiny. The long gamble from Pickett's Landing to Scott's negotiations has paid off. Now you follow the news to London. It arrives at the Foreign Office, the same place where 13 years earlier, the first confused reports of this mess had landed. What is the reaction here? Is it outrage? A cry for the fleet to be recalled? Not at all. The response is one of weary, almost dignified resignation. Historians still argue whether the British government was genuinely surprised by the loss, or if they had secretly expected it all along. In truth, they were likely just relieved. Relieved that this tedious, faintly embarrassing dispute that had dragged on for a generation was finally, definitively over. They had lost a few small islands, but they had maintained their crucial relationship with the United States and could now focus on the more serious business of running a global empire. They accepted the loss with a stiff upper lip and closed the file for good. But the most poignant moments are on the island itself. An official dispatch boat arrives, carrying the news that will change everything for the men stationed there. You are in the neat, orderly British camp at Garrison Bay. The commanding officer of the Royal Marines assembles his men on the parade ground. He reads the official announcement. Their 13-year watch is over. The land they have so carefully cultivated, with its English garden and whitewashed barracks, is now officially the sovereign territory of the United States. They are to pack up and withdraw. Then you travel the 13 miles down the road to the American camp. The U.S. Army commander assembles his troops and reads them the same news, but with a very different outcome. They have won. The long, strange, peaceful occupation has ended in their favor. Cheers erupt. The soldiers, who for years had shared this land with their friendly rivals, are now its sole masters. The final act is one of quiet, professional dignity. On November 25, 1872, you stand on the shore of Garrison Bay and watch as the Royal Marines hold their final formation. The Union Jack, which has flown over this spot for more than a decade, is ceremonially lowered for the last time. The Marines, with their equipment packed and their barracks left neat and tidy, march down to the waiting ship. They exchange final, respectful salutes with their American counterparts who have come to observe. Then they board the vessel, and it steams away, disappearing over the horizon. The joint occupation is over. The American flag now flies alone over San Juan Island. The Pig War has, at long last, come to a completely peaceful end. The last British ship has disappeared over the horizon, and a profound quiet settles over San Juan Island. For the first time in 13 years, only one flag flies here. You stand at the now empty British camp at Garrison Bay. The barracks are silent, the parade ground is deserted, and the remnants of the English garden are already beginning to be reclaimed by the wild Pacific Northwest flora. The American soldiers at the other end of the island have won, but it feels less like a victory and more like the quiet end of a very long, very strange party after the guests of honor have finally gone home. The island slowly transitions from a geopolitical flashpoint to a peaceful American community. The U.S. Army maintains its post for a couple more years, but eventually they too pack up and leave. The fortifications of Camp Pickett slowly erode, the blockhouse falls into disrepair, and the land is given over to farmers and loggers. The great military drama recedes into memory, becoming a piece of local folklore. And what of the men who started it all? Lyman Cutler, the man whose potatoes launched 1,000 troops, lived out the rest of his days on the island he helped make American. He passed away in 1874, just 2 years after the Kaiser's decision, forever known as the farmer who won a war with a single rifle shot. Captain George Pickett, the flamboyant officer who so eagerly made a fist of it, went on to a far more tragic and famous destiny in the American Civil War, his name forever tied to a disastrous charge at Gettysburg. The Pig War was just a peculiar prelude to his story. The men who tried to escalate the conflict, the hot-headed Governor Douglas and the aggressive General Harney, were both ultimately sidelined, their careers tarnished by their poor judgment. The true heroes, the ones who deserve to be remembered, are the old, wise veterans. Winfield Scott, who used his immense prestige to broker a peace, and Admiral Robert Baines, the man who looked a needless war in the face and had the courage to say, "I will not." The local islanders, for their part, embraced the absurdity of their history. For many years they would hold an annual Pig War picnic, a community gathering to celebrate the peaceful resolution of the conflict. You can be sure that roast pork was often on the menu, a good-humored tribute to the only casualty of the entire affair. Today, if you visit San Juan Island, you can walk through this history yourself. The American camp, with its restored blockhouse and grassy earthen walls, and the British camp, with its quiet fields and foundation stones, are both preserved. Together, they make up the San Juan Island National Historical Park, a unique park dedicated not to a bloody battle but to a peace that was bravely kept. And so we come to the final question. Historians still argue whether the Pig War should be remembered as a comical, trivial footnote in the grand sweep of history, or as a profoundly serious and important case study in conflict resolution. The truth, as it often is that it's both. The absurdity is what makes the lesson so powerful. It's a story that reminds us that huge, catastrophic wars can spring from the smallest and stupidest of beginnings. But it is also a hopeful story. It shows us that peace is not just an absence of war, but an active choice made not by distant governments, but by the soldiers on the ground who choose to see the humanity in their opponents, who choose to share a drink instead of firing a shot, and by the commanders who have the wisdom to know that no pig, no matter how prized, is ever worth dying for. The long journey of our story, which began on a misty June morning in 1859, has finally come to its peaceful conclusion. The memory of that one fateful pig has faded into the soft green landscape of the island, a place where the only standoffs you are likely to find now are between tourists hoping to catch a glimpse of a passing whale. The echoes of the past have grown quiet, leaving only the gentle rhythmic sound of the waves washing against the shore, a sound that has remained constant through all the arguments and all the years. As the sun sets over the Haro Strait, the very body of water that was the subject of so much debate, it casts a warm, golden light across the tranquil fields and forests of San Juan Island. The story is over, the borders are settled, and the peace that was so carefully preserved has held unbroken to this very day. Now, as our time together comes to a close, allow the quiet of that peaceful island to settle over you. Let the lingering images of green hills and calm waters be a gentle anchor for your thoughts as they begin to drift. There are no more cannons, no more arguments, only the deep, restorative quiet of a story that has found its end. It is time to let go of the details, to release the narrative, and to simply rest in the peacefulness that remains. The journey is complete, and now, it is time for your own quiet to begin.